Okay, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us. I am Julie Pampuch, Managing Principal of WB, and I'm excited to be here to moderate and to introduce the panel and kick off our conversation about capital planning. So I want to start with a little context. So in science and technology environments, facilities are business critical. Yet, according to McKinsey, between 50 to 70% of capital projects in this sector go over budget or fall behind schedule, often because planning is reactive instead of strategic. And for every dollar of maintenance deferred, it can cost between $4 to $7 down the line in emergency repairs or capital renewal. And that's according to the APPA, which is the Association of Physical Plant Administrators. And so equally important to those costs is the impact. And the impact is disruption, downtime, missed opportunities. Really big deal, especially in this sector. So we're here today to talk about capital planning, because capital planning can make a really significant difference. And I'm excited that the panelists today, that we have Raymond Doyle, our Managing Director of Science and Technology, and Fran Coffey, who is a principal. And both Ray and Fran have been at the company for over 15 years. And so they are really knowledgeable about this subject. It's great to have them share their time and expertise today and really talk about a capital planning playbook. So for anybody that sent in questions ahead of time, we'll address them in the presentation, and we'll also answer some questions that come up along the way. So let's get started.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Julie. As you mentioned, we're very excited to be here today. I think there's lots of considerations when coming up with your capital plans. So we're going to kind of walk you through that. I guess before we get started, we did do a brief poll beforehand just to kind of get a gauge on where the attendees' audience comfort level is with how happy they are with the current capital plan, and we saw some results all over the place, but a lot of them they didn't feel super over the top happy. So I think it's good to see some of the there's definitely room for improvement, and as Julie mentioned earlier, it's very impactful not only to the bottom line but just to the business itself.
Yeah, I think most people were middle of the road, right, Fran? So they feel like that some of it went well, some of it did not go well. So how do they make it better?
Yeah, exactly, Ray. So before we dive into it, I think we'll just take a second, just kind of walk you through, the things that we'll be talking about today. Some of these points might be somewhat second nature for you guys, while some of them hopefully will highlight some things that you haven't thought of and that might help you in your planning. So we'll go through the who, the what, the when, and the why, and then at the end of this, we'll kind of pull this all together and do a step-by-step on how you actually create one, step-by-step plan on how to create one.
So what is a infrastructure capital plan? And I think that the simplest description is at a high level, a capital plan is created to put a budget in place to replace the assets over time. And to do that, you need to start, as Julie mentioned at the very beginning, you have to be strategic about this. You have to think about things that start with the life cycle, understanding the assets, start with strategy, work your way towards a goal. And then from those two things, strategy and goal, you can get to what would really be the plan. We'd like to also use our resources and industry knowledge to pull these things together. And some of those include things like ISPE, could be ASHRAE, could be IEEE, and the manufacturer's maintenance and installation and replacement guidelines. What is the useful life of these types of assets? Always looking at it from a proactive angle is the best way to build your strategy, because at the end of the day, if you build this plan and you just throw it on a shelf or put it in a drawer, whatever store you want to use there, it oftentimes just gets forgotten and then isn't maintained, isn't updated, and obviously isn't looked at proactively. You're not staying ahead of it. You're kind of reacting to things. So that's not where you want to be. Um, so we,
Yeah. And I think it's, thinking about that proactive approach, and you're proactive, you're not throwing on a shelf. I think it's important to think about evolving, right, and changing. The business, the needs of the space is going to change. So as the business change, as your company might acquire different companies and different technologies, different products, whatever they might be, you need to change that plan. Things we've been seeing and coming across a lot of AI, robotics, and those types of spaces have different requirements, and to create those space and making sure that the spaces perform how they need to, you need to update and figure out what the most important factors are when creating these capital plans. We talk about creating financial planning tools, right? So for most of the time, we like to use, the basic. We find that the Excel sheet based tools are pretty simplistic, and they're the most effective way to kind of organize all your assets and figuring out, this is just an example of one where we have the type of equipment, the age, the model numbers, condition, how critical it is, right? Some companies rely on, there's different types of software, e-builder and stuff out there that you can lean on. And it just depends, for your specific business on how granular you want to get with the asset list. You can get down from you could just do the major equipment. You can get out of the secondary systems and distribution equipment down to the instrument level. So it depends on your business and what's the most important to the business to keep track of.
we like to keep it simple, Fran. I think the basics are the important parts so that it's easy for the overall team to manage and keep track of. If it's a complicated software program that somebody needs a bunch of training for all the time, you're not going to have the user-friendly connection to it. So that's why we like to keep it simple. And you can do outputs in any way you want through spreadsheets with the right type of graphics. So you can build the graphic story for the C-suite if they need it from a simple spreadsheet.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ray.
So who's the plan important to? We kind of look at this in multiple ways. Really, it's based on the end user or the person that manages the plan. So we'll just walk through a couple of the key people that are gonna use this type of plan.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it here just depends on how the real estate's set up, right? And so we'll kind of get into this. Is the real estate, and we're going to get into the owner operated. Are you leasing? Is it triple net? So we're going to kind of dive into some of these. So we'll start off with the owner operator.
So in the owner operator world, you're really talking about the people that might have a campus or multiple buildings. It could be a single building, but they built the building, purposely built, they occupy it themselves, and they manage all the assets within. And in the case of the capital plans we're describing here today, we're talking about infrastructure capital plans. So those plans would include all of their mechanical, electrical, plumbing infrastructure, and those would then need to be categorized, of course, based on need and the asset and how old it is, but and how critical it might need to be, or how reliable it is to their actual business. The other component of this same category is somebody that leases an entire building or maybe part of a building that has a triple net lease. In that triple net lease, they're responsible for all of their maintenance, all of the replacement costs, all the capitalization of the assets that support the building. So it's a unique lease type, but it is very common in science and tech and biotech.
Yeah. Another role that needs to be thinking about capital planning is property managers, right? So if you're managing a property for an owner, you need to understand the goals of that asset. And is it a long-term hold? Is it a short turnaround sale? So I think when doing this communication, understanding of what needs to get done, when it needs to get done, why it needs to get done, going through these it just helps everything run smoother. But I think it's just important to understand what the goals of the owner are. If it's, saving on capital costs or more operational costs, because they're going to be paying the utility down the line, and they want to put solar panels on the roof or whatever they may want to do that's important to the property managers. But all this needs to get considered and needs to get planned. But there might be it's just a different vision than maybe one that's the owner operator a little bit closer to the business itself. The next one is tenants in full service lease, right? So we see this a lot of times, in where a science and technology lab space might go into a high-rise building where they have some office components and then they have lab components. So in these setup and scenarios, it's just important to clearly communicate who's responsible for what systems and what spaces. A lot of times we'll see that that the landlord and property management team will be responsible for the office space, where a little bit more of the critical spaces, IT rooms, lab spaces, a little more where there's some liability there. So to make sure that the tenant knows who's covering and who's planning ahead for what assets in that space.
When should you create one? We say everybody should have one, and we recommend updating it annually. We're going to talk to a few of these influential factors that will help you when you need to create one.
Yeah, I mean, I think the timing and frequency of developing an update in that is really, depends on the type of facility, right? So it can vary. So everyone should be customized and reviewed and figured out based on the type of business and the type of facility. So, you're not going to plan, say, a data center the same as an office space, right? So as you're going through, one of the first factors we think about is the type of facility. And then we go to the age and building system type, right? You could have a 30-year-old building that has 5-year-old infrastructure because 5 years ago, it needed a refresh. Or you could have a 100-year-old building, some of these older buildings, brick and beam buildings that you put in science and technology lab spaces into. And when you're doing that, you could be on your third or fourth generation of building systems, right? You're going back to the, 1800s, so you're coming back in these buildings where the systems have been turned over so many times. So the age and system is important to consider when building these plans. The next we talked about, as as companies change and update, business change, you need to adapt the plans, and you need to factor in these changes and how they're going to impact the capital planning. Right. Recently, we've seen a uptick in ESG, right, and figuring out ways to bake those goals into the capital plans, right. So thinking and considering that, maybe going decarb. So being aligned on what the business goals are, and making sure that those are considered when planning.
Yeah, so you get into financial cycles and then budget planning. And the key thing there is to understand the value of your money. So if you're looking at an asset today, it might cost you, say $50,000. But if you have to move that money forward, say 20 years, or even 10 years or 5 years, let's just say it's moving it forward 10 years. You take $50,000 and you move it forward 10 years, and you're going to replace that in 10 years. You have to figure out what that is going to cost 10 years from now. And everybody tries to use a crystal ball, but you'd have to use some basic economic principles and say that inflation has been 2.5% to 3%, maybe a little more than that over the last 20 years. And you can take that and escalate it to the future value of money. So $50,000 10 years from now, based on inflation, might be $67,000, $68,000. And that gives you the cost of the money. That doesn't give you the cost of the project. You need to have design contingency. You need to have economic and kind of commodity volatility built into that. So we talk about tariffs today a lot, but the tariffs themselves also could be replaced with commodity instability. The cost of steel or copper might go up or down. Typically things go up, they don't go down. But in that case, you have to include another 15 or 25% of contingency to make sure you cover that. So you need to, put all of those costs into your capital plan. So when you're budgeting future money, you're doing the best you can at the time that you budget it. Updated each year, of course, so you get there.
Great point.
And then, of course, the idea that if you don't understand the condition of the asset that you're going to replace, you might miss timing, right? You could be too late. It could be after it failed. So we talk about maintaining your reports, maintaining your maintenance records, understanding that you're always doing visual inspections. But the key there too is at the end, or maybe the year before, if you think you want to push it a year because you don't have the capital that year, you need to do some testing, retro commissioning testing, to verify that it has the capacity, it has the useful life to make it through another year or two. So through testing, you can adapt and modify your plan, but you do need to make sure you have the appropriate testing plan in place to verify that. We talk about. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was going to say,
No. Yeah. Go ahead, Ray.
No, we talk about sometimes that business changes, and that sometimes will cause the need to make increase or change your risk, and that sometimes can be due to the value of money. And if you have it, businesses have to stay in business, so sometimes they have to make tough decisions.
Great point. And transition to the why, right? Why you need a capital plan. So kind of walk through some key factors here.
Yeah. So we always say that, aligning with the stakeholders. I just mentioned this idea that businesses are the ones that really have to make the tough decisions, and all of the stakeholders that are part of the process need to be informed. So you have to socialize your plan. You have to let people know when there's going to be downtime. You have to let them know when they might expect some outages, short outages. You need to make sure they understand if there's a business risk associated with that. The team that's working in the actual building or space, manufacturing, R&D, or whatever they might do, could be warehouse. They're feeding back their potential problems to the maintenance of facilities and capital planning team so that they can add that to the plan and make sure that everybody's aware of the timing for things. We talked about minimizing business risk a minute ago, but I think as part of the plan, you need to list the risk under each asset. So when you itemize each asset, you have a category of business risk. It could be loss in money, it could be loss in production, it could be potential loss of a client. So there's a lot of these risks. And then with that risk, you can then mitigate it by managing the plan to address each one of those items.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point, right? You need to understand why, how important is this piece of equipment or asset, and like how impactful if we lose this, what do we lose? Do we lose like product? Do we lose clients? Do we lose customers? Do we lose space? And that space is important. So I think it's a great point. The third one was we talk about, one of the reasons you want to create this plan is, you can improve reliability, redundancy, and efficiency, right? A lot of times these days we look and it's you can't just do that one-for-one replacement these days based on either local codes, new energy codes, compliance codes. So I think it's just important to get ahead of that, right? You need to understand what the replacement entails, so that there's no blind spots going into it. The next is, so now we're going to spend some time kind of walking you through this. I think is like the fun part, kind of walking through the step-by-step plan on how you develop the plan. So we talked a lot about, sorry, Julie, is there a question?
I just want to jump in. Yeah, there is
yeah.
a question. And I know that we're going into this section about how do we develop a plan, but
Yeah.
I love this. The question is, what is the best way to keep a plan realistic? And are there any like warning signs that you see when you're working with someone on developing a plan? Any warning signs that what they're putting together is unrealistic?
I think there's a couple different things there. If I jump in, Fran, not to
Go for it, and then I can
grab
jump
it,
in.
but yeah, no, that's right. We always talk about this idea of being realistic. Is one of it's being realistic with the budget. So that's the first thing, right? So, and then the schedule, right? So the two things that kind of talk about management, right? Budget and schedule. It seems simple, but there's a lot of influencing factors to those budget and schedules. But the ones that kind of strike me as the most difficult sometimes is the ability to actually replace the assets. So that's where you get in trouble. If you don't plan for the appropriate amount of time or the disruption or the outage, as we were saying earlier, because it could be a lot of safety risk associated with some of these pieces of equipment. And that's where you have problems where they're not realistic. They set lower budgets than are realistic, and they set shorter schedules than are realistic. So that's where you get to the problem where they could fail. That's where I see the problems most of the time.
Yeah, I think the only thing I think that's great, Ray, and I think the only thing I was going to add on to is just kind of thinking about some of the goals and if they're too lofty, right? So, some of these goals can be you want to be net zero by 2030, and like to achieve that, the cycle and the time to achieve that, you just might not physically or have enough time, right? The lead times, the planning ahead, the planning's key, right? I mean, we're talking a lot, and we kind of using that word a lot today, planning, but it's important to understand what the goals are. And how, get a roadmap and a pathway to get there. Right, we're going to jump into the this step by step. So I think the first thing, right, we want to align the business and the facility goals. So as we kind of go through these, I think it's crucial to best understand what's the most important for the different business units. Some considerations might be redundancy, it might be reliability, flexibility, humidity, how clean the space is. So I think kind of understanding what the goals are, and then going into like who's responsible. The roles and responsibilities we talk about. It might be who's going to be impact and influence these planning. Is it the real estate arm? Is it the finance? They need to work with the finance team to go and say, this is what we got to do. This is when we got to do it, and like this is why we got to do it. So having those. Being aligned from the facilities group to the business group, and then obviously keeping the finance group in the mix too. It's important for all these different players to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. The next step, right, is we talked about this before, is creating that asset list, kind of going through all the different equipment. How granular do you want to be? How detailed do you need to be to make sure that you're set up for success? So kind of going through that. So we have the list, and then kind of understanding what the priorities are, right? And how critical of the spaces are. You might have, as that business evolves, we talked about, they might need some more lab space and less office space. So baking that in, and then the system level, architecturally speaking, like how does different systems support different spaces? You don't want to have a 100% outside air, 2N redundancy serving an office space, just because that's what the space served before. So it's really crucial and important to really understand how the space is set up, what the systems are, how they differ, and then how they can, how you can have common systems serve both spaces, and how you need to make sure that you're not doing overkill just because that's what's in place. The next is assess equipment conditions.
Right. So jumping from, you're getting the complete asset list, as Fran just described, and think of it a little bit in a way as a kind of a property condition assessment, right? If you don't have a capital plan, one of the first things you need to do is create that list and then evaluate its condition. So a lot of times that is the predecessor to a good capital plan, is a property condition assessment. And what we use in addition to that property condition assessment, which is typically based on visual inspection, age and condition, we often like to, as I mentioned earlier, combine that with the, something like an energy audit or retro commissioning report. Because if you do those two things together, when you create the actual capital plan, when you assess the equipment before you start to categorize it, you have all the information to make better decisions. So more information obviously gives you a better platform foundation to make good decisions in the future. And one thing I like to talk about is this idea of making sure that you talk to all the staff. Fran and I do this all the time when we're working with our clients. Is we want to talk to everybody. We want to talk to the guy that changes the belts on the fans, or programs the BMS, and manages the dollars and uses the space. But the people that run the equipment are the ones that are closest to it. So making sure that we get a good understanding from them, how they feel comfortable, not comfortable. And sometimes it's not even the age or condition. It might be they think it should operate differently. So sometimes a capital plan can give you an opportunity to make improvements. And we talk about this too as we spaces, right? So you got the criticality and the risk. And as I just said, sometimes it's, the good information you have to be able to get there. Sorry, Fran, I think I'm gonna.
That's all right. I'm gonna we'll keep cruising along here. So we got so the
Yeah,
next
there we
one
go.
is evaluate the criticality and risk factors here.
No, thank you. Sorry, I was
All
jumping
good.
ahead on that. But so the idea being really that you have all that good baseline, and then you can take the good information that you have, you created it, you've interviewed everybody, you created all the database, and then from there you can start to make the business decisions. You can start to decide what's critical to the business, what's critical to reliability, what's critical to safety, and understand where you can keep the plan really simple or where you need to keep the plan very complex. And a lot of times we talk about the risk and we need to reevaluate it every year because things change, right? Safety standards change, operations inside of the space change, might be R&D, so replaced a piece of equipment that has a higher risk or a more critical factor. Could be that the manufacturing has a lot more expensive operation, and that makes that a more critical business risk. So you need to make sure you're updating the what might have been simple last year may need to be very complex the next year. So updating for those criticality factors is real important.
Yeah, that's a great point. Right. We're gonna jump into the validate the key risk factors. So
Yeah, no, I think the real point here is that there really isn't any order to this, right? So we've listed a bunch. There's probably a bunch more depending on your business and your specific building type. But if you start with this type of list, you'll be able to start to assess things and make sure that you're putting them in the right place. We talk a lot about, safety and reliability because we want to make sure that people have a business that's successful, but the people that are in the space are safe. One of the things, story where we were asked to get involved in replacing some air handling units in the penthouse for a science space where they were doing some light manufacturing and testing, but it was critical environment space, temperature and humidity. And it was interesting because they budgeted the plan to replace the air handling units, and we asked them what the budget was, and they said it was X. And that was good to replace the air handling units, almost arguably on a rooftop or in a warehouse. But these particular air handling units were in a penthouse above occupied space, and the only way to get them out was to cut them up into tiny pieces with torches or to cut a hole in the roof or cut a wall out in the penthouse and crane them out. And not only getting them out being the problem, putting the new ones in was the same type of problem. They didn't have a service elevator big enough to bring the rooftop units or the air handling units to the roof and then into the penthouse. And they had to put up a crane to do it. And so it was real expensive, and the added cost of tearing the wall apart, put it back up, and the crane, and then they had to. EH&S Group came in and said, well, you guys can't be in the building when this crane boom is swinging across. They just didn't allow that. It wasn't part of their safety standard. So they had to do it on a weekend. So now we got overtime and things like that. The cost of the replacement of the air handling units was about 5x the original cost budgeted. And so it was a real painful exercise for the client. It was very time consuming, a lot of disruption. So as we put plans together, we want to try and at least highlight all of these things. We want to make sure that, if we see something like that as part of the plan when you're doing the walkthrough, it's not just simply taking a piece of paper and making a list. You have to include all of these types of factors to make sure that everybody's going to get what they need in a timely way. And I think Julie said it well at the beginning. It can be very expensive to the industry if it's not planned well.
yeah, and I think those are all those great points and great stories, and then like thinking about the logistics of it and the business impact. So yeah, money's one thing, but impacting that business and how you're planning and operating, it's just very disruptive if you don't have that plan in place. So I think that's a great point. So next we'll get into.
I just want to I just want to jump in here, and if we go back for just 1 second, we're talking about confirming alignment. And do you have any recommendations for communicating a capital plan, both to the stakeholders and then also for communicating infrastructure needs to non-technical stakeholders?
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think the plan can't simply be a bunch of spreadsheets. It needs to have the rationale behind it. And so there are some paragraphs where we include the story, right? So we're not journalists, but sometimes we have to tell stories and to build the case almost. Now I sound like a lawyer, and I'm an engineer. But that idea that,
A
you have
journalist
to,
and a lawyer here.
yeah, no, geez, I'm gonna be a doctor in a minute. I stayed at a nice hotel. But the idea being that, you have to tell the story, build the case, tell the story, so that when people pick up the book a year from now or 2 years from now, or as people leave and come and go from a company or a business or a building, it is usable. So to your point, how do you make that easily conveyed and understood? It does take a little bit of storytelling and some rationale behind the story, and it does then makes it more useful for everybody, because you get into quick arguments. Well, we don't have the money. Well, you need to have the money because this is the risk. What's at stake. And if you can agree that what's at stake is a real risk, we need to find the money, or we need to accept the business risk and know that if something goes down, everybody's going to kind of have to pay for that problem across the board from top to bottom. So I do like that. It's a really good point and a great question, because it gets lost in a lot of reports. They become very technical and don't have the story.
Yeah, and I think Ray, it's all good stuff. I think to kind of build on it too, right? It all starts at the beginning, right? At the beginning, what's the goal? What's the goal of the business? What's the goal of the plan? So then, when you're going and you need to communicate and explain why you're doing it to everyone's got a boss. Why you're doing this? What impact does it have to the business? You can say with confidence, like, this is what we're doing. These were the goals that were set forth, and this is how I'm going to execute those goals. So I think having that plan, and then I know we talked about creating those basic asset lists, but I think getting those asset lists together, right? And then you can just like Ray said, right? There's tons of different softwares. We use them in our world every day, right? To kind of graphically show the impact of them. So kind of leaning on some of those. I'm gonna give a quick plug to our Domo friends, because we use that a lot. Kind of helps us get organized and make good business decisions. So we're going to jump into build that number 6, building a plan. So right, we talk about spending money over time and the proactive approach to capital budgets every single year. So I think you need just the planning ahead, especially for those big replacements. Those big replacements, you got to set that capital aside for kind of build up to that plan. And then when you're developing the plan, the biggest thing that we see so much is, the year before, you got to get your budgets, you got to get the capital planning budgets together, and you got to figure out what you're going to spend next year. And I know Ray made a great example of that replacement within the penthouse and taking down the wall. I mean, that's a real thing, and it happens in so many different ways. If that plan's not developed to a point where what the exposure is, that next year it could go sideways really quickly, and it's not a fun day for anybody. It's disruptive, it costs money, you have to go ask for more funding. So just really getting ahead of that and planning ahead, because some of that legwork, that due diligence and feasibility studies, that work needs to get done anyways, and you're less than 12 months away from doing the work. So doing it the year before, when you're coming up with those budgets, is crucial. It's one of the most, if you take away anything, I want you to take away this, because it's just, I think, coming up with that and understanding what needs to get done. What are the auxiliary pieces of equipment? Do I need to touch structures? It controls? This is a power. It's not just replacing an air handle. There's so many different components and considerations. So doing those up front is super important.
I think that's really good. And oftentimes we talk about the devil's in the details, and those are the things you're talking about, right? It's the things you touch that aren't directly connected, right? That are indirectly connected. And we also talk about this idea that we get into sometimes people talk, is it 10 years, is it 20-year plan, what's the plan? And I sometimes use the analogy that like when my kids, I started saving for their college. I should have saved more every year before they started college. But if you don't save based on your energy savings, or you don't put that money in the account to build the capital for these replacements at the time it needs to happen, you can fall behind on a budget. So I know everybody doesn't have direct impact or direct control over the budget, but kind of reminding the people that do, the finance people, the CEO, that the capital plan needs to be funded. So there's just this continuous evolution of it that's real important, and that is a key to a good plan.
Yeah, that's good stuff, Ray. So as we wrap things up, we want to just kind of take a minute to review some of the key takeaways. Hopefully you guys all found this informative and helpful, and hopefully it will help you in your planning and make you think about things maybe you didn't think about before you attended this webinar. So I think the first thing we talked about, right, is aligning the capital plan with the business goals. Like, so that communication and alignment there is crucial to make sure that you're, on the same page, the facilities team with the business team with the finance team, right? And then we get into know what you have, create that list, get it organized, figure out what's the priority, and it's going to help you be to succeed in your business goals. And then I think the next thing is prioritize what matters, right? We kind of goes hand in hand there. What matters and why does it matter? So you kind of organize that and what matters there.
Yeah, and I think that as you can transition from what matters and what's critical, you want to get right into prioritizing those critical factors and understanding how you then go from those critical factors to funding those critical factors. So the idea of planning and providing studies a year or two before, so that the funding is planned in a smart way. So as I said earlier, if you need to do some testing to move some things around in the plan, you're using the money wisely for your business and for the capital replacement. The last thing is kind of the obvious, right? We end with, if you do all of this right, you're going to avoid the disruptions. You're going to be able to maintain business, continue to have happy employees, happy profitability and successful businesses, and have a lot easier way to get through the year over year. So avoid those disruptions.
Yeah, that's great. That's good stuff, Ray. So
Great.
hopefully you guys all enjoyed it. We have some I don't know if we have any Q&A, Julie. I know
we do.
got
We have some more
throughout.
questions.
All right,
Yeah,
bring them on.
a couple
Let's
more
go.
questions. Okay. The first one is, are there common things that people forget when creating a capital plan?
They forget. I think they forget to update it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the one that I hear the most. Well, we didn't talk about that asset when it got installed, and 3 years later, 5 years later, when it failed, they didn't even have any maintenance records for it. Like, it didn't even get added to the. So it's sometimes it's just things move too fast in the business, and they don't get added to the plan, or they just get kind of passed over unintentionally. So it's just the sad but true part of that people move too fast sometimes, and they miss things, and that's
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it's easy to hit that easy button, right? Because like, oh, we did this before, we're gonna do it again, and then it's like you kind of figure out the plan, and something you might not think about is the goals change. We talked about that, evolving the plan with the business goals, and so you're gonna go, and then all of a sudden you say, oh yeah, next year we're gonna switch all of our rooftop units from gas fired to we're gonna electrify it all because of our ESG goals, and that's where we want to go, and we're gonna just do it. We'll budget the money, we'll get some numbers to replace one for one. Besides gas, we're gonna go electric. Go electric, and then you have that plan. The next year comes around, you implement it, and then all of a sudden you realize, hey, we need a service upgrade. This is going to take 18 months. So now all of a sudden your whole plan's folded and you're back at ground zero. So I think just thinking that through and kind of developing that year when you're coming up with those budgets. I know I said this before, there's a one takeaway, but we see it all too often where it's just not thought and developed enough up front. So that's my one recommendation.
Julie, the other thing that I would like to add to that is sometimes it's the software and controls that they update a whole system, and it's not an asset you touch, right? So if you're not paying attention to that software, and then whether it's Siemens, Johnson, could be a bunch of different software companies that create BMS software and hardware, some of their old stuff will age out. It'll become obsolete, and the next thing you know, you have to upgrade the software, the hardware, And it can be a lot of money and a fairly big disruption as well that you just weren't paying attention to if you're just paying attention to physical assets that, kind of move air and chill and power and things like that. So we need to pay attention to those maybe less tangible assets as well.
I feel like this question follows that one as you're talking about like quick wins and moving too fast. So this question is, are there any, ironically enough, quick wins that companies can implement while working towards a long-term plan?
I think, Fran, I'll jump on a real quick one, but it's similar to the building optimization, practice or the decarbonization practice. A lot of people are, getting involved in now. There's a lot of, low cost, big impact solutions that you can add to your capital plan that have kind of maybe half year steps, right? Simple things like adding VFDs or replacing lights or, creating control strategies to save money that aren't big downtime, big cost items, but can also have a great impact. So I think those are, in my mind, some quick wins. I don't know if any other ones come to your mind, Fran.
Yeah, no, I think the one thing that comes to mind, and we talk about it as part of the steps and the step by step is just getting organized, right? It's like you think about it. We work with a wide range of companies in the science and technology world, from well established pharma to companies coming out of incubator spaces that aren't that well organized, and they don't know what they have, and they don't know when they need to do it. So I think depending on your company and how mature you might be, I think it's getting organized, getting that asset list together, and then from there you can build on there and start analyzing what's the most important. But I think that'd be the one thing I would suggest.
What role do consultants play in capital planning?
I'm going to keep on going, Ray, since I just went. So I'll just say the same thing is, identify those unknowns early on, right? I think that's the biggest thing is, from our experience in how we approach and listen and understand what the goals are, and we take that and then we challenge, right? We challenge what the goals are and how to achieve them, and saying, this is what you're trying to do. This is how you're trying to do it, and these are the things you should be thinking about considering it. So we can kind of take those sometimes technical tasks and just kind of make them, like we said, leaning on some of the platforms that we have to make them more digestible for, say, C-suite or people that are helping making those business decisions. So I think getting that pulled together and just we like to think of it as us helping our clients make good business decisions. Like, we put ourselves in their shoes. Like, if this was me and this was my asset and this was my piece of equipment and these were my goals, this is what I would do. This is where I would spend my money. This is when I would spend my money. And so I think that's the way that we can help our clients.
I think that's really good, Fran. And I was going to say that, depending on the business size and scale, you mentioned companies kind of have the incubator. They probably don't even have a full facilities team. They need more help. The very large corporate companies might have great facilities teams and staff, but they need to be augmented when they need to do specialized things like studies, feasibility, maybe some energy audits, maybe some retro commissioning, and maybe they just need somebody to put the framework of the plan the first time and then help them, through it every couple of years to give it a quick update and then polish it up. So it just really depends on the scale and size of the company, and having meetings to talk about how they do it and where we could best fit in, or as a consultant we could best fit in. I think that is healthy for a business to evaluate. Some cases they can do a large part of it themselves, and some cases they can benefit a lot from consulting support.
Okay, one last question. And so we are seeing so much change, right, across industries from the impact of AI. So just from the capital planning perspective, have you seen any impact that AI is having on this process?
I think so. I think it also depends on how critical the equipment is that you're managing or operating. So in a lot of more complex space and with more critical environments are being supported by the infrastructure, there's a lot of companies are doing things where they're doing infrared testing. They have accelerometers that might tell you the vibration pattern of that that platform or of that piece of equipment. So if anything's out of balance or anything is loose, or if anything starts to get out of alignment, the vibration factor would go up, and that gets reported. So they could monitor and trend the potential failure through things like vibration, through infrared scanning, through temperatures and things like that. So they're the equipment to monitor and manage the critical spaces or the critical inputs that could indicate future failures through AI now, through software, can analyze all that data set, can give you information that would drive potential failures before maybe the end of its useful life, or may indicate that it could live much longer than its useful, the original useful service life. So it goes both ways. And that's something that is really going to impact the industry more and more over time. But the sensors, the ability for engineers, plant engineers and operators to learn more without having to get out there and tear things apart is really going to be a big change for the operators in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point, right? It's like technology just in general, it's going to, all this information and data points that we have now. I mean, think about, you drive your car, it tells you when your tires are low, it tells you when it's almost time to change your oil, all that stuff. Back, 30, 40 years ago, they didn't do it, right? It didn't do that at all. So like, it's the same thoughts with building equipment. There's more sensors, there's more monitoring, there's more information to proactively help you make good decisions and stay ahead of things and understand how healthy is my equipment. Is it going good? Does it need some attention? So I think that's the biggest impact from AI.
So more data to make better decisions.
Yep.
Yeah, great.
Awesome.
Fran, Ray, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us today.
Awesome.
Thanks for joining.
Okay.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one. Take care.